You might not expect human settlements to thrive in the Sonoran Desert of the southwestern United States, as the name implies. It is a desert, a place that scorches, dehydrates, and starves most attempts at cultivating plant and animal life, including those all too resilient organisms known as us. And yet, against all odds, several communities throughout history have chosen to call this harsh environment home for some reason, taming nature and its unpredictable elements to irrigate the land, grow crops, and, well, prosper. So much so that today, this seemingly inhospitable expanse serves as the backdrop for one of the greatest success stories of the 19th and 20th centuries in America. The rise of one of the largest cities in the United States, renowned for its economic growth, demographic boom, and urban expansion. But as the 21st century rolled into its second decade, the fundamental flaws of this setup began to become rather evident. I mean, how long can a city and its population just continue to expand? Well, Andrew Ross, professor of social and cultural analysis at New York University, defined this urban area as the least sustainable city in the world. Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalism organization ProPublica predicted that by 2050 the city could be the, quote, least habitable place in the United States. Alright, so, with all that in mind, let's explore the many challenges that are facing Phoenix in Arizona. The city of Phoenix is located in Mariposa County and serves as the capital of Arizona. Its metropolitan area spans 9 large cities and towns, including Phoenix itself, and covers an area of nearly 15,000 square miles or 38,000 square kilometers. Now, this means Greater Phoenix has the capacity to easily encompass the entire country of Belgium, with a bit of room to spare. Now, this vast territory is home to about 4.8 million people, with nearly 1.7 million residing in Phoenix proper, making it the 5th largest city in the US. Belgium's really small, isn't it? By the way, inhabitants of the city are called Phoenicians, not to be confused with their namesake ancient Mediterranean traders and seafarers. Obviously. Now, before exploring the current issues that are facing these Phoenicians, it is important to revisit the past and understand how this city's development has always been linked to the struggle against water scarcity and extreme heat. Now, the first major group to inhabit the region were the Hohokam people, a pre-Columbian civilization known for their impressive hydraulic skills. As early as the 3rd century BC, the Hohokams had excavated approximately 250 miles of irrigation canals, drawing water from the Salt and Gila rivers into the unforgiving arid landscapes of the Sonoran Desert. Now, this network is considered the largest pre-Columbian irrigation system on the entire American continent. The Hohokams inhabited the region until the 15th century, with their numbers peaking at around 40,000 individuals. Now, according to Professor Andrew Ross, that was when their society started to disintegrate. A series of droughts may have led to water scarcity and sparked conflicts over water usage, and consequently, the Hohokams scattered from the valley, eventually being replaced by other groups, such as the Pima, the Papago, and the Maricopa. By the 19th century, the region was initially a part of Mexico, but it was handed over to the United States following the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. What was then the Arizona Territory became home to many settlers and pioneers only after the Civil War, when the doctrine of manifest destiny propelled migration to the west. Now, one such pioneer was teamster, gold prospector, Civil War veteran, and overall force of nature, Jack Swilling, who took notice of the by then abandoned canals that were dug by the Hohokam and their successors. Looking for arable land to support a nearby mining town, Swilling resurrected an ancient irrigation system, a move that eventually led to a small agricultural boom and the foundation of a new settlement. This was officially recognized by county supervisors back in May 1868. Now, one of the early inhabitants of this place, Philip Durrell Duper, is credited with choosing the perfect name for the town. Inspired by the history of societal collapse and subsequent death, Duper chose Phoenix, the immortal bird said to rise from its own ashes. Indeed, the Phoenix rose and grew, propelled by the arrival of new settlers and fresh business opportunities spurred by the railroad expansion of the 1880s. Yet what truly ensured that Phoenix could survive, and indeed thrive, was water. More precisely, it was the ability to effectively manage and redistribute the waters from the nearby Salt River. Now, 2 pivotal steps in Phoenix's development were the founding of the Salt River Valley Waters Users Association in 1903 and the completion of the monumental Roosevelt Dam in 1911. Over the following decades, The Valley of the Sun was nourished by the tamed waters of the Salt River, which irrigated cotton plantations, citrus orchards, and cattle ranches. This allowed the region to support an increasingly larger population. At the outset of World War II, the government further boosted that population by constructing 2 new Army Air Force bases and transferring thousands of airmen into the area. After the war, many of these young men chose to settle in Phoenix permanently, drawn largely by the promise of affordable housing. Yet it is likely that many of them also had to contend with one of the city's ever-present challenges, the immense summer heat. Temperatures in and around Phoenix, they've always been really bloody hot, so much so that the lives of its inhabitants and the development of the city itself have depended on advancements in air conditioning technology. Throughout much of the first half of the 20th century, city residents relied on the method of evaporative cooling. But when portable, affordable air conditioning units became available in the 1940s, well, the good people of Phoenix simply could not get enough of that shit. As air conditioning became ubiquitous in private homes, Phoenix experienced a boom, with its population quadrupling during the 1950s alone. This growth was further fueled by a monumentous evolution in the valley's economy, which shifted away from agriculture and toward manufacturing, especially manufacturing of electronics. Large employers, including Motorola and the US Army, they took advantage of affordable real estate to establish plants and research centers, and attracted thousands of families, which spurred even more investment and development. So Phoenix continued to grow at a real rapid pace, and it became known as one of the big success stories of what was called the Sun Belt. This is a region that encompasses 16 states from Virginia to Southern California. But just how sustainable could that all be? Alright, so this brings us to the problems besetting Phoenix as of the 3rd decade of the 21st century. So now, the many ills of the city are complex and intricately intertwined, so we'll ask your forgiveness if we oversimplify a little bit today. But it's easy to identify the top priority issues here: intense heat, lack of water. Among other factors, internal temperatures are exacerbated by urban sprawl, which contributes to both pollution and a growing housing crisis, an aspect of widespread economic inequality. Anyone who's visited Phoenix in the summer can confirm that the city, along with the surrounding Maricopa County, is f***ing hot. Over time, however, the situation has got worse. As of the early 1990s, the urban area experienced about 7 days a year when the mercury could rise above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 43 Celsius. Good Lord, Phoenix. In the ensuing decades, the frequency and intensity of these heat waves increased, fueled by the effects of climate change. Higher than average temperatures are not only an inconvenience, they could totally kill people. Heat waves caused the death of more than 150 Phoenix residents from 2016 to 2018. More recently, in the summer of 2023, Phoenix and Maricopa County experienced temperatures rising above 110 Fahrenheit for an astounding 55 days. Jesus, and I think I'm hot in the summer. According to official estimates, this intense heatwave contributed to the deaths of 644 people across the city and county. Now, not everyone was affected equally, of course. The emergency department at Banner University Medical Center reported that severe heat was particularly harsh on vulnerable groups: the elderly, individuals with pre-existing conditions, people addicted to methamphetamines, and generally those who couldn't afford air conditioning in their homes. The situation underscores how important it is to protect oneself from the heat, even when not directly exposed to the sun, and highlights the vital role that air conditioning plays in this protection. A May 2023 study titled "How Blackouts During Heat Waves Amplify Mortality and Morbidity Risk" simulated the effects of a blackout during a 5-day heatwave in Phoenix. The study projected that without the protection of air conditioning, as many as 13,000 people could die during such a blackout, and 800,000, about half of the population, would likely be hospitalized. Emergency medicine doctor Anish Narang reported to The Atlantic how he and his colleagues at the Banner University Medical Center fought an uphill battle against the overwhelming calamity of heat stroke. The chief method consists of immersing patients in ice and tap water inside cadaver bags to lower their temperatures below 100 Fahrenheit or 38 Celsius within 15 minutes. To quote him, "Patients coming in at 108, 109 degrees who have been in the heat for hours, they're pretty much dead. We try to cool them down as fast as we can, but even those who survive heat stroke risk organ failure and years of neurological problems." End quote. This hellish situation is unlikely to improve. On the contrary, according to Climate Check, a provider of climate risk analysis, extreme heat and its consequences may render Maricopa County uninhabitable within the next 20 to 40 years. So one reason Phoenix is so hot is, obviously, because it's in the middle of a desert. However, the steady increase in temperatures can be attributed to numerous human-made causes, one of which is urban sprawl. Now, urban sprawl is defined as a pattern of low-density expansion by large urban centers into surrounding agricultural areas. More precisely, this expansion is characterized by patchy, scattered, and discontinuous development of mostly single-family housing that leapfrogs over underdeveloped areas. Urban sprawl presents a lot of problems across various geographical environments. It leads to rapid depletion of resources, overdevelopment of suburban roadways, and over-reliance on private transport, and the sacrifice of agricultural land to the altar of real estate. In other words, urban sprawl is unsustainable, and it's especially unsustainable when your city's in the desert. The extent of sprawl became particularly evident in Phoenix starting in the 50s, when economic growth, driven by the manufacturing sector, spurred a population surge. This growth continued unchecked over the following decades, peaking in the 1990s. At that time, the population in the Phoenix metropolitan area grew by 45.3%. That's about 3 times the national average. The overall number of Phoenicians is still on the rise, with growth rates of 4% in the first half of the 2020s. And that probably doesn't sound like a lot, but consider that the national average is just 1%, and you can see why it's quite big. Now, what drives this surge isn't the city centre, it's the suburban areas. As of 2025, the suburb of Buckeye ranks as the 5th fastest growing area in the whole of the US. This ballooning number of Phoenicians has translated into a huge demand for housing, and real estate developers were quick to provide a matching supply. To maximize their profits, developers and their investors sought the most affordable lots, buying vast tracts of arable land further and further from the city centre. And, well, hey presto, Greater Phoenix developed into a spontaneous and very poorly planned sprawl of suburban districts, mostly structured as rows of single-family homes. As much as the residents of these homes loved their suburbias, they still had to drive to central Phoenix for work, study, or leisure. This necessity led to the construction of long, ubiquitous paved roadways, often at the expense of parks or other urban forested areas. Now, the obvious outcome here was the creation of a so-called urban heat island. Now, in plain terms, this refers to just a vast area covered in asphalt that attracts and absorbs a simply unbearable amount of heat. Moreover, the road network was, and still is, frequently congested at peak times, leading to a dense layer of pollution hanging over Phoenix. The locals like to call this the brown cloud. Now, this situation is another significant headache for both city authorities and inhabitants alike. Car exhausts are not the only culprits for pollution here. They share the brown cloud duties with power plants. As the residents of Phoenix need to crank up their air conditioning units during the summer and spring, power plants often run overtime, contributing to both ozone and particle pollution. According to the 2025 State of the Air report published by the American Lung Association, or ALA, we'll quote them here, 84% of Arizonans live in a community with unhealthy air. Tailpipes, power plants, and extreme heat contribute to ozone pollution challenges. End quote. The association also noted that more frequent and intense heat waves have led to an increase in wildfires, which in turn contribute to particle pollution. A previous ALA report published in 2024 detailed that during the 2021 to 2023 period, Phoenix experienced, quote, a significant increase in unhealthy ozone days. These ongoing challenges mean that Phoenix appears among the most polluted US cities, end quote. Citizens in the capital and across the state, they're very aware of the risks that are posed by declining air quality and its impact on the climate and natural environment. The Arizona Clean Energy Poll of 2024 highlighted that 74 and 56% of Phoenicians support solar and wind power, respectively, while 78% of them believe that a transition to clean energy will improve air quality as well as strengthen the Arizona economy. Another consequence of all of this urban sprawl, perhaps a counterintuitive one actually, is the lack of affordable housing. And you might be thinking, well, if developers in Phoenix are building so many houses that the area is turning to a heat island, surely there's got to be plenty of accommodation for everybody, right? But no, that's not how this works. First of all, the supply of accommodation may not be enough to meet demand. The population of the entire state of Arizona has been growing rapidly in the early 2020s, as attested by the latest figures published by the 5-year American Community Survey. In 2022 alone, more than 280,000 individuals moved into Arizona from other states, with a net migration increase of almost 82,000 inhabitants, the fourth highest net gain in the United States. Moreover, the majority of these newcomers have chosen and will continue to choose Phoenix as their new home, as 53% of them to be precise. When demand consistently outgrows supply like this, the result, of course, is supply and demand, the house prices go up. In addition, the supply side is dominated by private developers who have prioritized the construction of single-family homes for suburban middle-class customers rather than building more affordable apartment blocks. According to leading real estate website Zillow.com, the average home price in Greater Phoenix in April 2025 was $435,000. That's compared to $295,000 in April 2020. That represents a 48% increase over 5 years, an escalation that has pushed homeownership far beyond the means of most families, as highlighted by Amy St. Peter, Deputy Executive Director of the Maricopa Association of Governments. According to St. Peter, people who work as firefighters, nurses, police officers, teachers, or construction workers typically do not make enough money to afford to buy a home, which requires a salary of $123,752 to reach the median price of $460,000. End quote. Another root cause of affordable housing scarcity is zoning regulations. Now, most municipalities within Greater Phoenix, they're zoned exclusively for single-family housing. Although these areas can be rezoned to accommodate subsidized housing construction projects, the process is not at all straightforward. According to Director of Research Alison Cook-Davis at the Morrison Institute for Public Policy, the rezoning process is long and complicated, to quote her, taking up to 2 years or longer for an application, end quote. Given these conditions, housing developers risk losing their funding, which may ultimately discourage them from pursuing affordable projects altogether. The natural alternative to expensive home ownership is, of course, renting. However, this option can also be prohibitive for many households. As of 2024, median rent prices have reached nearly $1,700 a month. Phoenix officials maintain that rent should account for no more than 30% of a household's income in order to be considered affordable. Yet, for more than a quarter of Phoenician families, paying $1,700 per month amounts to over 50% of their income. That is definitely not affordable, and it's definitely not sustainable. As pointed out by Amy St. Peter, even one unexpected bill or high utility cost can leave families unable to pay rent, risking eviction. In fact, 14% of renters in Greater Phoenix are at risk of eviction compared to the US average of 8%. Often, the only way families can avoid eviction is to make harsh decisions, such as giving away running water. According to research conducted by King's College London and the University of Arizona, as early as 2021, 6,300 households in Greater Phoenix were living without running water for a variety of reasons. Some had fallen behind on bills, while others could only afford to rent rundown flats or even sheds or warehouses where access to the water mains was faulty or just didn't exist. The study found that this issue disproportionately affects people of color, who actually represent the majority of individuals without access to running water across the whole US. According to lead research Katie Meehan, quoting her, "The compound pressures of high housing costs and expenditures mean that more low-income, asset-limited people are living without running water. Far too many people, especially those of color, are now in such extreme poverty that they are being pushed into homes that do not meet the basic standard for human dignity and life." Now, speaking of access to water, one might argue that the flourishing of any civilization is dependent upon it. And yes, we will collect the prize of the most obvious statement of the year once this episode is finished. Thank you so much. Jokes aside, though, any form of human settlement in the Valley of the Sun, both before and after the founding of Phoenix, has always depended on solving the problem of water. It's not only crucial for human consumption, sanitation, and agriculture, it's also vital for maintaining the cooling systems at the Palo Verde nuclear power plants located just 20 miles west of Greater Phoenix. As mentioned earlier, one of the main preoccupations of the early Hohokam inhabitants was, well, how are we going to take a big load of water into this extremely hot and dry desert? Centuries later, that question does remain top of mind for city officials, with drought-induced fears and crises periodically keeping the Phoenix Water Services Department pretty awake at night. The department themselves bluntly state on their website that, we'll quote them here, our water supply doesn't rely on rainfall. Rain is, in fact, a scarce and unreliable commodity in the arid landscapes of Maricopa County. Greater Phoenix receives just about 8 inches or 20 centimeters of rain per year, a figure that is even lower than the extremely hot and desertic countries of Uzbekistan or Sudan. With raindrops rarely falling from the sky, the Water Services Department must rely on 3 main sources of H2O. The biggest contributor is snow melting on the mountains surrounding the Valley of the Sun, which then trickles into the Salt, Verde, and Colorado rivers. The liquid power of these waterways was harnessed by the Roosevelt and Hoover dams, creating vast reservoirs, chief among them being Lake Mead and Lake Powell, both located on the Colorado. These artificial lakes supply households, factories, and farms alike through a network of canals and aqueducts. The city also benefits from a supply of groundwater that saturates several zones beneath the land surface of Greater Phoenix. In addition, the Water Service Department has invested in the treatment and recycling of wastewater. This recycled water is used to irrigate non-edible crops, maintain parks and golf courses at the perfect shade of green, and, more importantly, keep the Palo Verde nuclear generation station operating at a safe and cool temperature, although I guess that level of importance depends on how much you like golf. Now, while the Water Services Department has done wonders to ensure a steady water supply for Greater Phoenix, by the mid-2020s, it did begin facing some serious challenges. Take groundwater, for example. The use of this resource was regulated as early as 1980 thanks to a pioneering law proposed by the Arizona Groundwater Management Study Commission, which was led by researcher Kathleen Ferris. The 1980 law aimed to prevent excessive use of groundwater in Arizona's most developed urban areas, intending to preserve the precious underground liquid for 100 years. Unfortunately, the law did not safeguard groundwater reserves at the fringes of Greater Phoenix, where suburban sprawl meets rural hinterlands. Throughout the 1990s and well into the 21st century, mega farms, mostly owned by non-Arizonan and foreign conglomerates, pumped millions of liters of groundwater as if there was no tomorrow, causing the water table to inevitably sink. In June 2024, Kathleen Ferris spoke to the Atlantic journalist George Packer, denouncing the effects of such unchecked water use on the welfare, livelihoods, and even the infrastructure of Arizona. Quoting, "We will have land subsidence, roads cracking, destroying infrastructure, and in some cases, people's taps going dry." According to Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs, certain areas of Greater Phoenix have already gone completely dry, at least as far as groundwater is concerned. In an interview with The Atlantic, Hobbs disclosed that the subsurface water supply had been fully allocated during the term of her predecessor, Doug Ducey. She further explained to George Packer that Ducey had been informed about this looming crisis, but had responded by either ignoring it or even, quote, buried a study that parts of the valley, including Buckeye, had fallen short of the required 100-year supply of groundwater, end quote. This crisis is compounded by a decline in subterranean supplies, which has exacerbated the drop in the city's primary water source, the reservoirs. As early as 2018, The Guardian reported that snowfall over the Rocky Mountains had reached a record low, dropping to 70% below the average. The result was clear. Less snowfall led to reduced meltwater feeding into the rivers, which in turn left the reservoirs drier. By June 2022, water levels had dropped to historic lows at both Lake Mead and Lake Powell. As a result, the Water Services Department enacted the Stage 1 alert of their drought management plan, mandating city services to limit water waste and encouraging residents to conserve water wherever possible. Fortunately, an unusually heavy rainy period in 2023 brought the city back from the brink of a severe crisis. However, the underlying problem persisted as the capacities of Lake Mead and Lake Powell remained at 35%. According to risk analyst Climate Check, the region surrounding Phoenix, quote, has experienced 1,039 weeks since 2000, with some of its area in drought of any level. Indeed, 228 of those weeks were marked by, quoting again, extreme or exceptional drought. Since 1,039 weeks is just shy of 20 years, this means that since the start of the 21st century, Phoenix has experienced drought for the equivalent of 20 out of 25 years. According to the Water Services Department, this situation isn't unprecedented. The region has already experienced extended, extremely dry periods in the late 16th century, the late 19th century, and then in the 1950s. While these cyclical droughts occur naturally, the department emphasizes that, quote, global climate change has the potential to impact the frequency and severity of water shortages. Now, Phoenix and Maricopa County may face a complex maze of near-apocalyptic challenges. But the authorities in charge, they appear well qualified to tackle them. For example, Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego holds a degree in environmental science and previously served as a strategic planner for the Salt River Valley Waters Users Association. With this background, it's no surprise that Gallego's priority focus is on, quote, becoming a more sustainable community. In fact, it was Gallego's office that inherited the wastewater recycling program mentioned earlier. The mayor has also enacted zoning and tax policies designed to counter urban sprawl by encouraging the development of apartment blocks in the city centre rather than single-family homes on the periphery. In 2021, 2 years after taking office, Gallego created the nation's first publicly funded Office of Heat Response and Mitigation led by David Hondula. Hondula and his team have been tasked with reducing the worst effects of extreme temperatures, especially fatalities caused by heat stroke. The office has implemented projects such as repurposing shipping containers into solar-powered cooling centers, providing a refuge for Phoenicians without reliable air conditioning, and homeless residents seeking relief from the intense heat. In 2024, the office also launched a campaign to plant more trees throughout the city to mitigate the effects of the urban heat island. A central component of Hondula's strategy is addressing the economic inequalities inherent in the city's social fabric. The director of Heat Response and Mitigation acknowledged that low-income communities bear an unequal heat burden, and he declared that his office will direct, quote, investments in mitigation and response to the communities where there is the greatest need. Of course, this is only one of the many actions that are needed to divert Phoenix from its predicted path, a trajectory that seems destined for catastrophic unsustainability. Yet city, county, and state authorities appear determined to challenge what many observers and academics have already deemed inevitable. After all, it wouldn't be the first time that human civilization in the Sonoran Desert, much like the mythical bird, has risen from the ashes. Thank you for watching.